We have 5 distinguished speakers who are here with us, representing public sector, private sector, the government, as well as academia. Okay. So let me start by introducing one after the other, starting with Peng. Peng manages Samsui Supplies and Services. He is also in charge of CSR outreach for Soup Restaurant Group. He helped set up the social pantry with associations for persons with special needs. And currently, Samsui provides 4,000 meals a day to underprivileged people in Singapore. He is also named as one of Channel News Asia's top 20 champions for change. That's Peng. The next person is Carrie Wong. Carrie Wong is a senior manager in the planning and development team in the Waste and Resources Department of the National Environmental Agency. She has more than 10 years of experience working in the field of environmental protection. She's currently heading the food waste management team, which is responsible for formulating and promoting policies on food waste minimization and recycling. The third person is Erin Sweeney. Erin Sweeney is a US Fulbright scholar in Singapore, hosted by Murdoch University. Erin is an urban planner. Her research focuses on food supply chains from field to fork. Her current research explores factors that drive consumer demand for locally grown food in Singapore. Erin previously conducted research for the UN Food and Agriculture Organization with smallholders in India and in Jamaica. The fourth panelist that we have is Teng. Kevin is the Executive Director of Sustainability at Marina Bay Sands. You all know Marina Bay Sands, no introduction needed there. Kevin spearheads the industry-leading Sands Eco 360 sustainability program. He's also the Executive Director of Design and Construction at Marina Bay Sands. In his role, he leads the planning and construction of capital projects that propel the IR's future growth. The last panelist in our group is Nichol. Nichol co-founded the Food Bank Singapore, which aims to end food insecurity in Singapore. The Food Bank Singapore collects and redistributes excess food to more than 280 non-profit organizations, reaching out to more than 115,000 underprivileged. Can I welcome all the panelists to come on stage, please? Okay, so thank you very much for being a part of this. It wasn't easy to get you all on board together at the same time. Thank you for taking the time out to be a part of this panel. I'm sure the audience will appreciate the various discussions that we're going to have, which is going to be very interesting. Please note that you're being videographed. So the intent is also to have it a no-holds-barred open discussion. The idea behind the videographing is some of the people who couldn't make it, could be interested, could leverage on the NVPC platform to look into it. So thank you for being here. We are a well-balanced, gender-inclusive panel. We have 3 men and 3 women, or 3 women and 3 men. You need to be careful how we say that. So starting off on the topic of responsible food, we'll spend 25 minutes through a moderated panel, and then we'll open it up for questions from you. So this is a question to all of you. We'll go one after the other. Let's start. Well done, Nichol.
Ladies first.
Let's start with the challenges in your own areas of work. Could you talk about 1 or 2 of the key food-related sustainability or social impact challenges that Singapore is facing currently?
I think for me, it's that the resistance to change. I think a lot of because we serve a lot of underprivileged in the charities. I think a lot of charities, the person in charge, the CEO, all these are quite resistant to change, or like, for example, the change of single-use plastic. Because we provide about 2 million meals a year on bento sets. So for them, it's like, they still prefer to have that kind of plastic kind of containers rather than using porcelain or metal containers. For them, it's like, plastic is is easier for them, so they can use and throw away. Rather than we provide them with a container, you have to wash and then we have to collect back. They thought there's a lot of logistically issues with that. So that is one part of it. Then the other part is they want to be in full control of the kitchen. For example, they want to manage the food supply chain, which they are not very good at. For example, they don't have a bulk purchasing power to purchase the kind of food from the suppliers, from the farms. And then we see that there's a lot of wastages. For example, the food that's coming in to their kitchens, because the chef will not be able to sieve out the good food, the good ingredients and the bad ingredients. So whatever the ingredients that comes in, they will just use it. But end of the day, a lot of things goes to waste because it's not usable. So I think this is one issue that we face when we serve the underprivileged.
Thank you. So single-use plastics,
And the food wastage.
the cost and the food wastage. Right. Thanks.
So I'm from NEA, so I will share on Singapore's food waste. Yeah, so I think most of you might know in 2017 we generated 810 million kg of food waste the whole year. Yeah, so the amount of food waste has increased by about 40% over the past decade. So the increasing amount of waste is actually putting a strain on the Earth's finite resources. So energy, labor, water, and land are also required to produce food and also the products. And when food is wasted, resources will also be needed to transport. I thought too long already. Yeah, so I'll speed it up. So again, so when food is wasted, so we also need to put in resources to collect and transport the food waste to disposal facilities. Yeah, so all this will increase our carbon footprint and also contribute to climate change. Yeah, so for Singapore also, because we are land scarce, so the increasing amount of waste, based on our current waste generation rate, increasing rate, we'll need to build more disposal facilities. So that we know that this is not sustainable for Singapore. Yeah, so that's why this year we have designated the year towards Zero Waste Nation. Yeah, where we aim to raise awareness on the waste issues and also to work with partners to rally Singaporeans to treasure our resources and also to build a strong TRIA culture in Singapore. Thank you.
Carrie, it was all food waste in here. Erin?
So I'm clearly representing the foreigner diversity on the panel. And just before I start, I'd like to say that I've been in Singapore for 5 months researching local food supply chains, and I have learned a lot from the other academics and scholars here in Singapore who have offered to mentor me. So I'm representing my own research, but also thinking about all of the academics that have taught me what I've learned in this short amount of time. So Carrie set me up well thinking about land scarcity, and Singapore, many of you probably know, Singapore imports over 90% of the food that's consumed here. That means that less than 10% is grown by farmers who are often growing leafy vegetables, fisher people who are doing fish in the straits, and then egg farmers. So, and of course other products as well. And when we think about food security, Singapore ranks very highly in many global ranking systems in terms of how food secure we are because of that ability to diversify. The AVA has spent a lot of time sourcing and building relationships with countries so that 180 countries supply food to Singapore, which is pretty fantastic. So this leaves us with a challenge not about food security necessarily, but about food resiliency or food robustness, as one of my mentors calls it. And this is the ability to respond in the face of a crisis like climate change, rising sea levels, or perhaps geopolitical challenges that could affect Singapore in the future. So my research is, in the past, has really focused on agricultural production, but here in Singapore, I'm looking at how consumers think about the local supply chain, because in order to facilitate that robustness of the food supply chain, we may need to think more about that 10%, and perhaps shrinking, but 10% of food that's currently grown here in Singapore. So I'll look forward to sharing more about that.
I'm going to speak, to me the biggest challenge we face is in consumer perceptions, not consumer awareness. I think we've hit a tipping point when it comes to consumer awareness. A lot of our guests and visitors, B2B and B2C, are aware of the issues with sustainable food, but it's really the consumer's perception that, as alluding to Roja's slides, the consumer's perception about the quality and price of sustainable food. And that is very challenging to overcome. We did almost 20% of our events last year had a sustainable food menu served, but we got almost 50% of our events that asked for it. And then somehow during the tasting process or during the negotiation, it dropped off. And that is, we believe it's because the perception that you can't, it just, a vegetarian meal isn't going to taste as good or is not as luxurious or doesn't have as good face in your wedding or something, that the perceptions, overcoming the consumer perceptions are to us the biggest challenge of convincing our guests to eat more vegetarian.
Okay, so I wear a couple of hats, right? So I'll start with the food bank. I think most of you know me as the co-founder of the Food Bank Singapore. We are one of the very few charities in Singapore that goes out to purposely source for excess food. So I'm not a charity that asks you to go to the supermarket to buy foods, because a lot of the food in the industry, it's thrown away, 25 to 30%. We're talking about still good to eat food, products that are pulled off the supermarket shelves. And so some of the challenges that we face is that a lot of the companies in Singapore, they have this fear about liability. Like if they donate their excess food and someone falls sick. So I'm not even talking about cooked food, I'm really talking about packaged foods with a date. They would prefer to incinerate the product than to donate. So I think this mental mindset is causing a lot of obstacle. Second thing, which is an interesting point, and I would like to share that because Singapore's in Asia, a lot of the Asian bosses or taukeis, as we call it, there's a shame value that's tagged to donating food items instead of cutting a $50,000 check. So how do you overcome that mindset that actually donating your excess food doesn't mean that your business is bad, but you're also doing something good as well? The other hat that I wear is that I'm the MD and CEO of one of the food distributors in Singapore, and we service more than 4,000 over F&B establishments, including hotels to standalone restaurants. And honestly, one of the projects that we've been spearheading is called Go Local, which supports local farmers. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is that most of the F&Bs in Singapore, they feel that if I eat local products, it means that the price must be 50% cheaper than imported products. And because of this mindset, a lot of the farms in Singapore are struggling because, as you know, land is expensive, labor is expensive. Basically, vegetables that's locally grown in Singapore that reduces carbon footprint are going to easily cost 50 to 100% more than all the cheap products that we get from across the border, for example. And so Food Services is trying to do something about this as well, because if we don't support the farmers locally, in 5 years' time, there'll be hardly any more local farms.
Thank you all. There was a host of different topics in there, from single-use plastics to food waste to consumer awareness, consumer perceptions, to locally grown food items. Sometimes it's easier to talk about challenges. At some point in time, we need to start pointing at what are the best solutions that you believe is available in the market to address those challenges that you spoke about. Nichol, you want to go this way?
Since the government is here, I'll just put it point blank. Firstly, I think some kind of a good Samaritan Law. That's very important. I understand sometime last year someone was thinking about launching it, because that doesn't guarantee that nobody falls sick or goes bad or whatever. But at least it encourages more companies to actually donate the excess food and even donate the excess whatever, which helps with recycling. So because there is no law that protects donors at this moment, a lot of people are really, really scared, because we live in Singapore for 58, 59 years, perfect, hospital-like, can eat from the floor. They are so scared about falling sick or dying from eating of this food, which there isn't much until last year, but anyway, that's another story. But I'm just saying that many people are very fearful of the liability part of things, and if I can just put it up front as well, I think the 4-hour ruling by NEA needs to be reviewed, because that causes a lot of food waste as well, on many, many levels. So let's take a look at it.
Thanks, Nichol. Being very direct. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Nicole. So in terms of solutions, I think what's practical for this group to know is that there are genuinely a lot of really good quality sustainable food products. You just have to look for them. Maybe we need to improve our marketing a little bit when we go to the supermarket, or maybe even at MBS. Every single one of our restaurants has really good vegetarian and sustainable food options, whether it's seafood or not certified cage-free chicken yet, but we're getting there. But to me, I think that it's just a matter of us really trying to look for it. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said this. 5 years ago, we had less than 5% responsible seafood, despite our best efforts to do it. Last month we came in, we're at about 34% of our total seafood is now responsibly certified somehow. So there's a lot of there's a lot of good products to buy. So that, to me, is the biggest opportunity and the biggest possible solution for our consumers here.
Thanks. So Nichol set me up well to talk about the local farmers. And again, going back to this consumer perception, perhaps, there are many programs around the world that try to facilitate buy local and think about your local farmer and get to know a farmer so that you're more incentivized to perhaps pay what may be a higher price due to the costs of production. And here in Singapore, there's the Love SG Farm Produce logo that the AVA has designed. So thinking a little bit more about how consumers can make individual choices, but also how can policy frameworks be structured to actually encourage and support people to go out and purchase local. So there are farmers markets in Singapore. Seems like a fantastic idea. And a lot of times foreign researchers can come in and say, oh, you know, let's export this idea from, say, the US about buying local here to Singapore. But I think the important piece here will be for Singapore, in collaboration with the public, private, and hopefully academic sectors, to think about ways to actually shift an entire way of thinking about supporting the farmers, the 200 plus farmers that are producing that 10% of food here in Singapore, and make it a locally relevant campaign.
So to address Nichol's question, yeah. So yeah, definitely the for us the most preferred method is not to generate food waste, but to prevent and reduce food wastage, as well as to promote food redistribution. So definitely that is in our agenda, and we are indeed looking at the Good Samaritan Law. Yeah. So in fact, actually, we have also rolled out some initiatives to target at the different sectors to actually encourage food waste reduction. So like for the consumers, recently, I think just last week, we have launched a new campaign to actually encourage consumers to ask for less and order just enough, and also to swap side dishes if they don't eat it. Yeah, so these are some of the initiatives, and for the various sectors, for supermarkets, the food manufacturers, as well as the retailers, we have also rolled out some food waste management guidebooks, which actually provide some step-by-step approach on how they can actually reduce waste, food waste in their operations.
I think for us, how we overcome the challenges is, we partner with MBPC. So MBPC is our very strong advocate. So we grow from serving 100 underprivileged to now 4,000, and we still got about 1,000 more coming in next month. So we are still growing. After we partner with MBPC, like in 2013 or 2014, we has grown quite fast from there. They are always going around marketing for us. So I think this is one way we overcome it. So it's a free publicity for us. Free marketing, so I think it's a good platform. So I think going forward, I think the challenge is how do we employ more beneficiaries, people with disabilities, the image to work for us. I think this is what we are going to overcome in the future.
Thank you for some of the solutions that you proposed. I think we'll go into more targeted questioning now, at least looking at further downstream, looking at the consumer side of things. If you look at the Singapore consumer, this is the consumer from a global perspective, and this is more to you, Erin, but others can join in too. What is it that you see in the Singapore consumer towards responsible food? And if you have to compare that against a developing world consumer or a developed world consumer in another part of the world, what do you see and what do you hear based on your research studies?
So this is a bit of a disclaimer. My research will include a consumer survey of anyone living in Singapore about locally grown food, and it's launching tomorrow. So keep your eyes open, and then I'll have a lot more information to answer your question about what Singaporeans think. But many other researchers have explored this question of local demand here in Singapore for responsible food, for sustainable food. But I want to step back first and just point out that the Asian diet is certainly changing. I'm sure many of you have seen thinking about the role of urbanization as former smallholder producers are moving towards cities. They are also starting to take jobs that are increasing their income in some cases, and so people are starting to demand things like more meat and more processed foods, things that sort of signify wealth in some cases. So this is not across the board, but it is happening, and as we see this shift start to happen, perhaps in more developing contexts and countries that are also net exporters of food, we start to wonder, in the case of Singapore, what will happen, because Singapore is so dependent on these countries to actually continue to export so that we can continue to eat. So I think that what I'm seeing so far in terms of Singaporean demand, Singaporeans are very committed to local cuisine. So a survey in 2014 said that 82% of Singaporeans would prefer to eat local food, meaning a local dish at a hawker center or elsewhere, than any other type of food. And so starting to think about how can we build upon this commitment to local cuisine to actually also include food that's grown both here in Singapore, but also expanding this idea of local to Southeast Asia, and how Singapore might actually, as a developed country, start to invest in farmers and supply chains that are supporting Singapore directly, but are in the region and other countries in the area.
Thanks. Others?
Chip in on that? So we run a convention center, the Sands Expo Convention Center. We do at Marina Bay Sands. We do about 2,000 events a year, and we launched our Green Meetings program with a sustainable food. We call it the Harvest Menu, so it's regionally sourced, not just Singapore. It includes Malaysia and parts of Thailand for the rice. 5 years ago, when we launched it, we had about less than 10 clients, and most of them we had to pay. We were sponsoring it. But last year, we exceeded 240. So we had 240, almost 250 green events with sustainable food menus that we served. And this is when paying clients, cost neutral. It's still only about 10%. We're targeting to get to 20% this year. It's only about 10% of our event organizers. But the reality is, I think that awareness and perceptions and the demand for it is definitely growing. It's about, for us, it's about 10-15%, but we see it growing exponentially.
Thanks. This is more from a pure sustainability perspective. No matter what the companies are doing in the world today, and the progress at which companies are working, as well as governments, in addressing climate change, we all know it's not enough. Because the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, said we only have less than 12 years before any irreversible damage, human-induced, that could impact us both from a health as well as from a planet standpoint. And we are counting, so it's 11 years plus a few months plus a few days is all we have left before the temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade. That would impact hundreds of millions of people around the world. What do you think is needed for accelerated change in Singapore on sustainability?
I don't have a direct answer for this question, but if we are able to monetize it where people can earn money from sustainability, I think all Singaporeans will want to do something about it, because there is a business person in every Singaporean somehow, and the reason why the sustainability is not taking off as fast, because there is somehow, for some of the sectors like recycling and all that, there's no money to be made. So people don't really look at it. So I think if some clever genius, or some NGOs, we can come together and find a clever way of monetizing it, we can accelerate the rate of sustainability as well. But I think it's also important to look at the business fabric of Singapore, where we're made up of so many thousands of SMEs, because although the big boys like Sodexos and the MBSs of the world are doing a lot about it, basically the small business people on the ground do not understand what sustainability is, and they just feel that it's something like dreamy up there instead of my business. But collectively, if all of us can come together and do something about it, I think that can be a much greater movement, especially when the younger generation are coming in to take over some of these businesses as well. And I guess on this note, I'll just like to share one thing, is that the company that I run for the for-profit side, it's a small entity, it's not a huge MNC. But we took the move to pay more expensive to buy RSPO oil. Okay, although a lot of the restaurants will say that I don't want to pay $3 extra for this one tub of oil because it's more expensive. So what we did was we actually closed the loop, and this is an interesting partnership, and it's real and it's ongoing right now. So after buying the RSPO oil, We actually also partner with Alpha Biofuels, where they go around to collect the cooked oils, right? And then they actually pay the hotels for the oil that they collect per liter. And so now what happened is food services becomes that collection guy, that Karanguni that collects the oil, and yet still sell the oil. And so what happens is we actually close the whole loop. And what happens is the biodiesel is being pumped into our trucks. So I'm just saying that I'm supplying the RSPO oil, the hotel cooks it, sell it to biofuels, the biofuels sell it back to us to pump the truck. And then at the end of the day, the hotel still get a net final price off, which actually they earn from it as well, just by closing this loop. This is what I think successful, sustainable actions should be. It's not just one party or one side.
Thanks. Other accelerated change?
Look, we don't have a magic bullet. I can tell you what we're trying to do, though, and this is kind of our direction for the next few years. Is look, I think there's, in behavioral psychology, a lot of people talk about the EAST framework, right? Easy, accessible, social, and timely. We're really focusing on the S in that, trying to make it more social. I think if we look at some of the successes as an industry we've had in the last 10 years, I think shark fin is a success. A lot of hotels stopped serving that somehow stopped, is because it went social, right? If we look at certain things like in the energy sector, it wasn't just government policy, it was the fact that businesses and nonprofits, we made it social. So that's what we're trying to do with things. In sustainability, there's a history of being kind of boring, ISO audits, ISO 14000, a lot of policy, let's ban plastic bags, but these are policy is kind of boring, right? So we're trying to make it irresistible. So that's our new word. Sexy, irresistible for people to choose sustainability. Haven't figured out the magic bullet, but that's the direction I think that we need to go.
So I'm here as an urban planner and a researcher, so I'm going to put those hats back on, even though I'm looking into consumer behavior right now. So thinking about academia, I think sometimes academia can be seen as a white palace on a hill, and that scholars aren't coming down to necessarily connect with NGOs or private sector. That's certainly true in the US. I don't notice that in Singapore, but I can talk about the American perspective there. So there are many opportunities for scholars to partner with both the private and the public sector. And coming from academia, sometimes we have access to resources that private sector may not have. And so leveraging the experts in the field that exist across universities and across research centers here in Singapore, higher education is a huge component of the ecosystem in terms of who's talking about climate change. So leveraging that resource would be very important. And then the urban planning policy side, thinking about the role of ASEAN. So Singapore certainly has a large role to play, and ASEAN has put together a food security policy framework, and they have an opportunity to think about how to actually set up regional agreements on movements that impact climate change significantly, and I think that combined power of countries coming together would be a really important opportunity.
So speaking from the government point of view, yeah, so closing the waste loop and circular economy is something that we want to achieve to work towards our goal of a zero waste nation. Yeah, so we are looking at various initiatives, but definitely government can only do so much. We will also need to, that's why we also need to rally everyone's support to actually achieve this vision.
I think for us is that we are going to kind of create more awareness and education for the consumers to stop using the single-use plastics, especially the bento sets. So I think there's some work to be done, especially through the education part. And the other thing is that because we are also exploring using fuel cell for our central kitchen. So basically our central kitchen, we are looking into like energy efficient equipments. So we have some professors working on that. So that is something that we are working on.
I have a long list of questions still to go, but I'll not do that. Instead, I'll open it up to a Q&A from the audience. I'm sure you have many questions, and I know that you are already an interactive audience just by looking at you. So over to you. There is someone with the mic right at the back from NVPC. So the first one. Yes, we have someone from SG Food Rescue.
Hi. So I want to ask about the year of zero waste. Is this an ideal or is this a commitment? And if there is a commitment to make zero food waste a reality, then what needs to take place in Singapore in order for zero food waste to become a reality in the next 10 years? Because we got 12 years, right? And how do we know if what we're doing is making a difference? How do we measure this progress?
Okay, so our vision is working towards a zero waste nation. Yeah, so yeah, because we understand, yeah, this is really a very ambitious goal, but definitely we hope to achieve. That's why just now I mentioned about closing the waste loop and also looking at circular economy to look at how we can actually convert waste into resources, yeah, where we can also make use. So in terms of food waste, converting it, first of all, of course, to reduce, to prevent food waste from being generated. So looking at how we can actually reduce the wastage, and also for excess food that can be redistributed. And then in terms of food waste management, because food waste will still be generated, I mean, there will still be unavoidable food waste, then we look at technologies, innovative technologies that could convert this food waste into useful products. So like, right now, majority of the food waste are mainly the homogeneous food waste from the manufacturers, so that's converted to animal feed. So we are also working with the agencies, relevant agencies, and also the research institutions to look at how we can convert specific type of food waste into some useful products.
Hello, I'm a chocolate maker in Singapore, organic. I've got a question. I think Nichol answered, but I'm not sure I understood well. Out of the 90% of the food who's coming to Singapore, how much is wasted? You said there's 10% who's made here and 90% who's coming from overseas. Out of the 90%, how much is wasted in Singapore?
We don't have such figures. So what we measure is the amount of the food waste that is disposed of at the incineration facility, and then also the amount of food waste that is recycled. So that becomes the amount of food waste that's generated. But we do not measure like how much of the food that import and that is wasted.
Like when it comes to the incinerator, how much is it? Like, do you have any idea of it or no? Do you have any number?
What is the percentage
Yes.
food waste
Yes.
going to the incinerator?
Yeah. So you know that in the country you have, let's say, 1 ton of food is coming in the country, but there's
Yes.
2 tons, 200 kilos is finished in the incinerator. Do you know the numbers or not at all?
Yeah, so in terms of disposal, so food waste constitute about a quarter of the total waste disposed of in Singapore.
So it's very high.
Yes.
All right. Now my second thing is, in the academic way, do we teach the children here in Singapore for the future, or is it implemented by the government to teach them about recycling, about food waste, about ugly food and things like that? Is it put into the scholars, or it's not?
Yes, we do, and we actually have a program called Love Your Food at schools. Yeah, so where we actually have educational materials to encourage the students to reduce food wastage.
And the plastic use and so on, or just the food waste?
And also other ways as well.
Oh,
I'm just mentioning, yeah, for food waste specifically, there's this Love Your Food program.
Okay, thank you.
I'm the moderator. I can't answer, but for this question, probably on the students' topic, I'll just answer because Sodexo provides food to many schools and universities in Singapore, but also in other parts of APAC. We do a lot of work with the student community on teaching them awareness, but we are also there every day in changing behaviors and changing perceptions on the topic of food waste. We measure, as I showed on the slide, even the plate waste, the food that is left behind by the consumers. By the student community, and there we involve the students in the separation of food waste, but also inform them that what are the targets that the student community needs to set, knowing that the last few weeks this is the amount of plate waste that you generated. In the next month, can you reduce your food waste by 10%? So the community itself interacts and says what So there's a peer-to-peer learning and interaction and engagement to take them to the next level to say how much of food waste can we reduce. That's one angle. But we also do teach students how to compost through the academia itself, wherein we have a farm where the compost generated creates manure for the urban farm that has been created in the office space, in the school or in the universities.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Ash. I work in a company that does smart metering. So we help businesses measure the utilities that they consume. And in that space, what we find is that the moment our customers can become aware of the waste that happens in a very granular and accurate way, and the fact that the data is their data, is from their building, they take ownership of the problem. So when there's awareness and an ownership to the problem, immediately good people will find ways to make things better. That's what we've seen in utility space, whether it's water, whether it's energy. My question to you is, in the space of food, how can we make the awareness of food waste more in your face? Because often the food waste happens at the back of the operations that is out of sight of the consumer. So I think that's the key. If we cannot see the waste, we won't be aware of the extent of it, and we may not even take ownership to that waste. We think it's someone else wasting, not me. So my question is there any ideas on how can we measure food waste in a way that is right in the face of the consumer at the point of consuming?
Well, look, we have a long list of, absolutely, as an engineer also running facilities before, you can only manage what you can measure, right? So I have a long list, probably about 10 different technologies we've tried to measure the waste from. We've used RFID, we've used colored tags, we've actually, even with the NEA, we tried to do our own proprietary scales on site, in the kitchens, in our different parts of the property. It's very hard. And I say it's very hard because it still requires an enormous amount of effort from the operation side and from the guests, because especially in getting granular data. I'll tell you the couple successes we've had, and we've implemented it last year, is food waste weighing technology, but it's still done mostly manually. There's no artificial intelligence solution that works at scale. The second thing is, and they just implemented this maybe 3-4 years ago, is weighing the compactors on site. So that allows you to weigh it. Again, it's not that granular, but it gives you better data. So on one side, it's the data. But the second side, once you have the data, and we have the data now in our all-day dining buffet, is how then do you communicate it to guests? And again, we haven't figured this out. We do about 15,000 meals a day just to our staff. We tried to do this great campaign about it, and it hasn't really worked. I would say that we haven't found a way to make food waste really appealing right now. I think absolutely that's the way to do it, but we don't. I think one side's getting the data, and the second side is how to communicate it. Probably more optimistic.
I think a lot of times when people look at food waste, they think that it's the food that you can no longer eat at the buffet lines or like back of house, like when the chef cuts some of the meats and everything, and the trimmings and all that. That's like absolutely at the tail end of the F&B. I do not think that that's where the problem is. The problem is when there are tons and tons and tons and pallet loads and container loads of food that are still good to eat, when people send it to the incinerator by the pallets. So I guess the meter that we'll be using here, because not many large companies are able to buy those large weighing scales where you can put the pallets on it, I think it's called the human conscious. So I'd like to rally whoever who is here who's running a business or sorts, but it's really looking at the distributors, the traders, the large businesses, even the Nestle's and the Unilevers that's available in Singapore. They're not doing anything about the Maggi Mees and the Oreos that they pull off the shelf. It is all just being dumped away. So that's my first challenge to all the businesses that's in Singapore, and I think the best meter is the human conscious and not some data technology that can just fit into someone's kitchen. So that would be my point of view.
So I don't have research to necessarily back this up, but looking at initiatives that have happened outside the food space, like the $5 tax on plastic bags, for example, I think that has shown huge results in terms of people starting to, particularly in the EU, people starting to bring reusable bags because nobody wants to pay an extra 5 cents in the supermarket line. And so I don't have a solution necessarily, but thinking about ways that people's quick decisions that are made in a supermarket line or made at the grocery store or made in other spaces at the restaurant perhaps where there's a slight, I'm going to use the word tax, maybe incentive is a better word, to help people think about this, but it also doesn't all need to be placed on individuals, right? So to Nicole's point about thinking about the whole supply chain, there's food loss at every stage in the supply chain, and that also needs a lot more attention to be thinking about food that is falling off of trucks, that's wasting in farmers' fields, that is being disposed of because we have really early use-by dates. So thinking about these other steps along the way that don't necessarily call for individual level behavior change because that's challenging and it's also not entirely our job.
I think for us is that the food waste don't happen to us in the kitchen, it happens to us at the gas table. So because Singaporeans are always value for money and things like that, so that time we try to scale down, we serve a small portion, they start complaining, they start doing a lot of feedback to my restaurants, and hell, we got a lot of hell from all these customers. They say, you charge me that increase the price, but your portion is so small. So you got no choice, you go back to a big portion, and they cannot finish it, so you just throw it away. So I think for us, it's about education, it's about the awareness to the consumers. So because we run business, we are very always cost conscious. So definitely we will not import more than what we need. And we definitely control a lot. And if a chef throw away a lot of our ingredients, we will give them hell, we'll cut their bonuses. So for us, this is how we run our business. So definitely our food waste don't happen in the kitchen, it happens on the table.
Just my 2 cents on this as a moderator. One is, I go back to the value, and that's what probably Nichol was alluding to, is the consciousness. If we don't value something, we waste. It's as simple as that. And people have not, the cost of food, for all the value that food is bringing to us from a health, from a well-being and so on, is the cost of food in the world today is underrated. So the value of food needs to increase. And today if you ask at least some of the students, where's the food coming from? They'll say from the supermarket shelf. Many have not seen the farm. Many have not seen the love, passion, energy, and everything that has gone into the making of the food that is finally coming to the plate. So one hand is the cost aspect. The other hand is the emotional connect to the topic of food waste. So you need to put some value, or you need to demonize the topic enough that through peer-to-peer pressure, you see it as, okay, as strict and no.
Maybe I just want to share that for AE, we actually conducted a household waste study in 2016. Yeah, so I think most of the time people will always say that I don't waste food. Yeah, I finish up all my food. I don't have food waste at home. Yeah, so that's why we did a food waste, a household waste study, and from the findings we actually found that food waste constitute half of the amount of waste that is disposed of by each household, and half of this food waste is actually avoidable food waste. So which actually could be avoided if through proper storage or through proper planning. Yeah. So these are actually very interesting findings, and from there we also look at like what are the commonly wasted food. So commonly wasted food items. So on the top is like rice, noodles, and bread. Yeah. So that's why we are also looking at specific measures. So we have this campaign to actually for people to ask for less carbs. Yeah, less rice, less noodles when they order.
So there's a lot of questions and interactions on the topic of food waste. We have time for probably one more question, after which we can open up for networking over dinner. So is there a question around food insecurity issues in Singapore, and something that you want to talk about from a philanthropic standpoint, from inequality standpoint, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, 26 people in the world have more wealth than 3.8 billion people in the world. So how do we provide responsible food? I'm also triggering you to ask the question that would come this way. So me asking the question. So there's a question there.
Yeah, I do have a question. It doesn't really surround the topic. but I represent, I wear two hats. So I'm a co-founder of an organization called Climate Conversations in Singapore. So we really try to drive awareness through values. I think Nichol, you mentioned is about the moral choice, right? It's really and connecting climate to what we value as Singaporeans. The other hat that I wear is Asia research and engagement, and in that space we work together with institutional investors to try to drive sustainability changes within companies. I think that no matter which hat I wear, I think it starts with the person, it starts with the human. And I think that there is, someone brought up, I think Kevin, you brought up, how do we engage people using social, right? That's one aspect of it. I really want to hear maybe some of the experiments that some of the companies have tried on getting people involved and whether how successful that has been. But on the other end, as companies, you have employees as well. And to kind of move the company, you also need to engage your employees. I don't know if some of you might also be able to share where is that starting point to motivate employees to really work on such issues, because sometimes it might be seen as a little bit more of a burden and a difficult thing to do than something that is their day-to-day responsibility.
So the question was about motivating employees, right? Because there's a few very good points in that.
There was a two-part question.
There's a two-part, yeah.
The last part was the employee motivation,
Well,
and how do you drive?
Yeah.
The first is really from a consumer experimentation test. How do you drive the behavior change? Some examples that you would have done.
Yeah, no, actually, honestly, I've given talks on this for hours, literally, with our senior management about it. So some of the things that haven't worked first on the social side, there's a great study in the US, I think it was with hospitals and prisons, about reducing the size of the plate will drive better consumer awareness. It didn't work for us. We did it both at our hotel buffet and our staff, and the number of complaints that we got were far more. Even our senior managers like, can't even fit a salad on this now. I have to get 3 plates instead of one. It really didn't work very well. The other thing that we tried to do with our staff is we installed our own cameras that can recognize the food, and that was just seen as a little too draconian for them, right? So, our staff have uniforms and name badges, and the name and shame doesn't really work right now, at least when it comes to food waste, because of all the hard work people are doing. But in terms of engagement, some of the things that have worked really well has been positive incentives. So. We do, I think one of you mentioned about you partner with schools, so we work with some nonprofits on clean plate challenges, and that's worked really well. We do a staff bazaars that educate. We bring in various partners to educate our staff on it. We have really strong, the thing that we're doing socially now is, so every year we curate over 10 environmental movies, bring in some speakers, and we screen the movies for free, give out popcorn, and the team members can come and watch it. So we did Plastic Ocean last year. So obviously we don't get it for free, so we pay the nonprofit for Plastic Ocean. We gave some great sustainable popcorn with flavors, and we had team members. We had almost 1,000 team members participate. After it, people were blown away. We had people crying in the theater about it. So that's one of the social things we've been doing that's worked, is using visual media. We brought in a movie 2 years ago called Freightened about the shipping industry and pollution in that. After the movie, we put on stage Simon Bennett from Swire with Conservation International, and they had a very healthy discussion. Our team members loved it. They really did, so hopefully I gave you some examples of what have not worked, and then some that have. Hopefully that.
If I may add, basically in 2012, when we first started the food bank, we were even asking ourselves, like, we're such a small company, why the hell are we even looking at starting such a huge charity as a CSR, right? Yeah, but I guess the impetus was that someone's got to do it. And if that's a voice that's within anybody out there for that calling, that no matter how big or small you are, that all of us can play a part. I think that's really important. And we took that literally and drove it into all the events that we have for the food bank. So, of course, innocently in 2012, we just say, okay, we'll just write letters to the large food companies, the supermarkets, you know, they're all just going to, oh yes, now someone's going to take all the excess food, reduce my waste disposal costs and whatsoever, and they'll be very happy. But honestly, we were so disappointed that after going to 150 companies, there wasn't any success there, and simply it was because of the liability factor. That's number one. So what we really did was we went round till today to give talks. So if you know the food bank good enough, we have slides that are targeted at 3-year-olds. We have slides that are in Chinese that targets the 70-year-old aunties. We have slides for everybody because we realize that movements start from ground up. So we are going to corporates and giving talks, CSRs, small events, every other day. We're at some school, at some function. We don't get a single cent of donation or even food for giving all these talks. So the whole team has spent a lot of time talking about this issue. And simply because of talking, we have become one of the spokespersons about this problem in Singapore. So for the food bank, it's because we talk about both, right? So we talk about food wastage reduction in order to feed more people. And we're looking at about 25% of Singapore's population that are food insecure, that's not even able to feed themselves. And we're talking about Singapore as a country that has a 150 nasi lemak, a $2 nasi lemak, and there are still people who eat instant noodles 3 times a day, or maybe only eating 1 meal in the preschool, that's where they're studying. So this is a huge problem as a country, as society, and someone needs to do something about it. Even though we're not the wealthiest, we're not the biggest, but someone's got to do it. And so with that passion, we actually go out and spread the word. Yep.
Just one point on the topic of employees and how employees consider working within big companies and sustainability. I'll talk about not a Sodexo example, but an external example. I was talking to the head of sustainability for this large FMCG company. If you close your eyes and think who's the leader in sustainability, probably this company would be among them. And he was telling me at that point in time, the number one reason why people, potential talents, join the company is because of sustainability. Now, that's not a surprising factor because they are the leader in sustainability. But what he said after was much more surprising. He said the number one reason why people leave this company is because of sustainability. So when they come in with that expectation, creating a significant impact in the world. And where they don't see it in the day-to-day, be it from supply management, in the food side, be in the HR side or finance, but it's been allocated to a certain set of individuals within the company, they don't necessarily see themselves involved. And that creates a negative impetus for them to look for greener pastures. With that, probably we'll wind up this panel discussion, and thank you very much for all your support as panelists, and thank you very much as audience for being a part of this discussion. Thank you all.